I didn't fight back. I didn't slam the door. I just picked up my jacket, walked out of the gymnasium, and kept walking until the parking lot lights disappeared behind me. That was the night my parents stood in front of everyone at my university convocation dinner and told my aunt loud enough for the whole table to hear that my brother had already been accepted into the UBC Sauder School of Business, that he had a full scholarship, that he was going places. Nobody mentioned that I had just graduated. Nobody mentioned my name at all. I was 22 years old. And I had just become invisible. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that for my entire childhood, I was the other one. My brother, I'll call him Daniel, was 2 years older than me. And from the time he was in middle school, our parents had decided he was the one worth investing in. Not in a subtle way. Not in a we didn't realize what we were doing way. Inadeliberate. Consistent. Years-long way that left a paper trail, if you knew where to look. Daniel got the car at 16. I took the bus. Daniel got tutoring every week from a private coach in Burnaby. I was told to figure it out. When Daniel applied to universities, my father took 2 weeks off work to drive him to every open house, from Vancouver to Toronto. When I applied, my mother handed me a printed list of schools and said, "Don't pick anywhere expensive." I got into BCIT's broadcast media program. It wasn't UBC. It wasn't a 4-year degree with a ribbon my parents could describe at dinner parties. My father looked at the acceptance letter, handed it back to me, and said, "That's a trade school." I said, "It's what I can afford." He didn't answer. I worked 2 jobs through the entire program, one at a coffee shop near Commercial Drive. 1. Doing freelance audio editing for a local podcast network that eventually hired me part-time. I paid my own tuition. I deferred 1 semester when my hours at the shop got cut and I couldn't make rent. But I went back. I finished. I graduated with honors. And at the dinner afterward, my parents announced Daniel's scholarship to the whole table. I drove home alone that night. Sat in my car in the parking lot of my building in East Vancouver, and made a decision. I was done waiting to be seen. I was done performing for people who had already made up their minds about me. I started making a plan. It took me 8 months to save enough to move. I found a sublet in Ottawa through a coworker who had a friend leaving for a year abroad. The rent was manageable. And the podcast company I worked for had just gone fully remote. So I could take my job with me. I packed 2 suitcases, shipped 1 box, and left on a Tuesday morning in March. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving. I told my aunt, who I trusted, and I asked her not to share my address. I told 2 friends. That was it. The first 6 months in Ottawa were hard in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not because I regretted going. I didn't. But silence from family, even family that hurt you, has a weight to it. Some nights I would finish editing a 3-hour episode, close my laptop, and sit in my small apartment near the Byward Market and feel the specific loneliness of having made the right choice and still missing something. Not my parents exactly, more like the version of them I had wanted them to be. I didn't contact them. They didn't contact me. Daniel sent me 1 text about 3 weeks after I left. "Mom says you moved." "You okay?" I replied. "Yeah. I'm good. Talk soon." We didn't talk soon. We didn't talk at all for almost 2 years. I want to be careful here because what happened next isn't simple. And I've spent a long time making sure I understand it correctly before I talked about it. About 14 months after I moved to Ottawa, I got a phone call from my mother. I almost didn't pick up. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, watching the screen. And then I answered, because some part of me still had hope. "I suppose," She said hello, asked how I was. I told me the weather in Vancouver had been strange. And then within about 4 minutes, arrived at the actual reason for the call. My father had been diagnosed with a cardiac condition. Not immediately life-threatening, she said, but serious. He needed a procedure. The recovery would take time. She was saying it in the careful way people use when they want you to feel guilty, without technically asking for anything yet. I said I was sorry to hear that. I asked which cardiologist he was seeing. She said the one at St. Paul's? She said it was expensive. I said that BC's provincial health coverage should handle most of it. There was a pause. She said there were other costs. Expenses not covered. She didn't list them. I said I hoped everything went smoothly and that I'd be thinking of him. She said, "It would mean a lot if you came home." I said I'd think about it. I didn't go home. I called my aunt that same evening and asked, as gently as I could, what she knew. My aunt paused for a long moment and then said, "Your father is going to be fine. Sweetheart. The procedure is routine." I don't know why she's framing it the way she is. 3 weeks later, my mother called again. This time she was more direct. She said the out-of-pocket costs for my father's recovery were adding up, and that Daniel had already contributed, and that it would be fair for me to do the same. She used the word fair 3 times in one conversation, which I have found is usually a signal that something is the opposite of fair. I asked for an itemized list of the expenses. She said, "We're not running a business here. We're a family." I said I understood that, and I would be glad to help once I knew what I was helping with. She said she would send something. She never did. I want to be honest, I did not send money. I know that might make some people uncomfortable. I want you to understand that I had done the accounting on my own family long before that phone call. I had a spreadsheet, not because I'm cold, but because I was 24 years old and working freelance in a city I'd moved to alone. And I needed to know where every dollar went. On that spreadsheet was a line I'd added almost as a joke when I first made it. And then stopped thinking. Was funny? The rough dollar value of everything my parents had put into Daniel's education. Extracurriculars. God. And support, versus what they had put into mine. The gap, by conservative estimate, was somewhere around $47,000. Over the years we were both living at home. I am not saying this to be petty. I am saying it because, when my mother called asking for money and used the word fair, I had receipts. Not all families keep receipts. I did. About 4 months after the second phone call, I got a message from Daniel. Not a text this time, an actual voice note. He said he was going to be in Ottawa for a conference in 2 weeks. That his company was sending him to a sustainability finance summit near Carleton. And he wanted to know if I'd be open to grabbing dinner. I held my phone for a long time. I want to tell you that I said yes easily. I didn't. I thought about it for 3 days. I talked to a friend about it. I eventually decided that Daniel had not been the one who threw away my art project in grade 7 when I won a regional youth contest, and my father said it wasn't a real achievement. Daniel had not been the one who told me that my BCIT acceptance was a consolation prize. Daniel had. More than once as a kid. I looked uncomfortable when our parents made the comparisons out loud. That wasn't nothing. I said yes. We met at a restaurant near Rideau Street. Daniel looked tired in a way. I recognized the kind of tired that comes from performing competence for a long time. We ordered. And for the first hour we talked about easy things. His job. My work. Ottawa winters. He asked about my apartment. About whether I liked the city. He seemed genuinely curious, which surprised me more than it should have. Then, Somewhere after the entrees arrived, he got quiet. He turned his glass in his hands a few times. Then he said, "I have to tell you something, and I don't know how you're going to take it." I said, "Okay." He said, "Mom and Dad asked me to come find you. They didn't tell me you'd be in Ottawa. They hired a skip tracing service to find your address. They gave it to me before I left." I put my fork down. He said, "I want you to know I didn't agree to anything. They said they wanted to reconnect. I said I'd reach out. I didn't say I'd do anything else." He paused. "But there's more. Before I came, I found some things." Daniel is not a dramatic person. He delivered what came next, the same way he would have presented a quarterly report clearly, without editorializing. In order. I think that made it worse. Actually, it landed harder without the cushion of emotion around it. He had been helping our parents organize some financial documents a few months back. They'd asked him to help set up a new filing system. Apparently. And while he was doing it, he came across a series of documents that didn't fit. The first thing was a life insurance policy that had matured about 18 months earlier. The payout was $62. Ling ling ling. Our maternal grandfather had taken it out decades ago and listed our mother as beneficiary. She had received the money and told no one in the family. Not her sister, my aunt. Not either of her children. It had gone somewhere. But Daniel could not find where. The second thing was a statement from a private health spending account that my father's former employer had set up. Daniel knew about this account. Our father had mentioned it once years ago, but our mother had told both of us, separately, that it had been closed when Dad retired. It had not been closed. There were several $1,000s in it, untouched. That would have covered the exact cardiac procedure costs my mother had called me about. The third thing was something Daniel found not in the files, but in his own memory. He had been the one, he told me, who actually contributed $4,000 to my parents during my father's recovery. He had transferred it from his own savings account. My mother had thanked him and told him I had refused to contribute anything and that it had been hard on the family. She said it in a way that implied I had been selfish. He found out I had been asked for an itemized list and been denied one. He sat across from me in that Ottawa restaurant and said, "I think they've been managing both of us for a long time, and I didn't see it because I was the one who got the better deal." I didn't cry. I didn't say I told you so. I just sat with it for a minute. Because 22 years of being the other one doesn't evaporate the moment someone finally sees it. It settles. It gets heavier before it gets lighter. Then I asked him what he wanted to do. We talked for almost 3 hours. The restaurant filled up and emptied out around us. At some point, a server refilled my water without either of us noticing. By the time we left, it was past 11 and cold. That specific Ottawa cold that arrives in October, like it means business. And we stood on the sidewalk for a while in our coats, talking about things we hadn't said in years. Daniel told me that he had felt, growing up, like a symbol more than a person. That every achievement he had was immediately added to a ledger our parents kept to display to relatives and neighbors. That when he had gone through a genuinely difficult period in second-year university, he did not go into detail, but he mentioned that he had seen a counselor. He had hidden it completely from our parents because he knew that any crack in second-year half, his performance would be treated as a crisis. Not because they cared about him, but because it would reflect badly. He had never told them. He had handled it alone. I said, "I didn't know that." He said, "I didn't know about any of what happened to you either. Not the half of it." I thought about the convocation dinner. I thought about my father handing back my acceptance letter. I thought about my mother calling me 14 months after I left. Not to ask how I was, but to ask what I could do for them. I said, What do you want to do about the money? Daniel said he wanted to request a full accounting. He wanted to know what had happened to our grandfather's insurance payout. He wanted to know why the health spending account had been hidden from both of us when it would have covered the expenses they'd been calling us about. He wasn't interested in a confrontation for its own sake. He was interested in the truth. I said I was in. We didn't do anything rash. I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories can sound. And I don't think what we did was about revenge. It was about stopping something. Daniel requested a copy of the insurance payout documentation through our grandfather's estate records. He was listed as a secondary executor and confirmed the $62,000 figure. He spoke to a family law advisor in BC who clarified that under certain circumstances, withholding information about shared family estate proceeds could have legal implications. Particularly, if it could be shown that one party had misrepresented their financial situation to solicit funds from relatives. I went back and pulled every text message I had kept from my mother. There were 43 of them over 14 months. I organized them chronologically. The progression was visible: initial contact, framing of my father's illness, escalating language about cost, the implication that Daniel had contributed and I had not, and then silence when I asked for documentation. We set up a call with our parents. Not an ambush. We told them we wanted to talk. And we told them it was about finances. My mother said she hoped we weren't being difficult. Daniel said we just had some questions. The call was 40 minutes long. I will not quote everything, because some of it is still too much to look at directly. But I will tell you, the moment it shifted, about 20 minutes in, my mother said again that it had been very hard when I refused to help during my father's recovery, and that she had hoped moving away hadn't made me cold. Daniel said, "Mom, I need to ask you about Grandpa's insurance payout." Silence, he said. The $62, 000, that came through 18 months ago. I found the policy documents. I know it was paid out. My mother said. That's private. Daniel said. You called my sister and told her you had no money to cover Dad's procedure. The health spending account from his old job had several $1,000s in it that would have covered the costs. The insurance payout happened before any of those calls. I need to understand how that fits together, my father said, in a voice I hadn't heard before, quieter than usual. Something stripped out of it. Where did you get those documents? Daniel said. They're estate documents. I'm a named executor. Another silence. My mother said. We were managing a very stressful situation. I said. You told Daniel I refused to help. I asked for an itemized list and never got one. That's not refusing. That's asking for information. My mother said. You've always held things against us. I said. I have records of every message you sent me. I'm not holding anything against you. I'm reading from documentation. My father didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, we needed the money. And that was it. Really? That was the sentence. Not we were scared or we made a mistake. We needed the money. As if that settled it. After the call, Daniel and I sat on the phone together for another hour. He was quiet for most of it. I think he had spent a long time understanding, intellectually, that our parents had built a hierarchy between us, but hearing them live try to use both of us at the same time was different. I think it rearranged something in him that had been slightly wrong for years. He asked me if I was okay. I said I actually was, which was true. And strange to notice, he asked what I wanted to do going forward. I said I didn't want anything from them right now. I didn't want a confrontation. I didn't want to punish them. Exactly. They are aging people who have made a series of choices. I cannot reverse for them. What I wanted was to not be managed anymore. I wanted to stop being the story they told about themselves. Whether the version where I was the disappointment, or the version where I was the selfish one who didn't help. Daniel said he had already spoken to the family law advisor about the possibility of a formal accounting of the estate proceeds. Not a lawsuit. Just a documented request. He had sent a letter through his advisor's office, asking our parents to account for how the insurance payout had been used. Given that the funds came from our grandfather's policy, and other family members, including my aunt, had not been informed of it, my aunt, when Daniel called her, was not surprised. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "I wondered. He always said he had something set aside for the grandchildren." That part hit me harder than the rest of it. Honestly, the idea that our grandfather had been thinking of us, and that it had been diverted without a word. I don't know exactly where things stand as I record this. The letter was sent. We're waiting. My aunt is in contact with her own advisor now. I'm not expecting a dramatic resolution. I'm not expecting an apology that means something. What I am expecting is that for the first time in my life, there is documentation. There is a paper trail that tells a true story, instead of the one I've been handed. I still live in Ottawa. I have a good apartment now. Not a sublet. A real lease in a building near Hintonburg that I found on my own and that I pay for with money I earned. I have a cat named after a frequency range in audio engineering, which I think is very funny and which my coworkers disagree about. I do work I'm good at. I have friends I've made here who know me as a complete person, not as the other one. Daniel and I talk every week now. Sometimes it's about the situation with our parents. Often, it's about other things, his work, my projects, what we've been watching. He came back to Ottawa in January for a weekend, and we spent most of it walking around the market and talking about things we should have said 20 years ago. It's slow. Rebuilding, with someone you were separated from, by design. But it's real. A few weeks ago he sent me a voice note. He still does those instead of texts, which I have decided is endearing rather than annoying. And in it, he said, "I found a photo from when we were kids. You made this paper sculpture. Some kind of bird. It was on the fridge. I don't know what happened to it. I knew what had happened to it. I remembered watching it go into the garbage. Age 8. I told it wasn't the kind of thing worth keeping. I didn't say that to him. I said, I'd like to see the photo sometime." He sent it the next day. I'm looking at it right now. A small girl. A paper bird. A refrigerator in a house that no longer exists in the shape it was. She looks proud of what she made. She had every right to be. Some things you build again from scratch. And the second time, you build them for yourself.